And so when my mom passed, I literally stopped playing drums as a punishment almost to myself.
This is Joe Wong. Welcome to The Trap Set, where each week we explore the lives of drummers. I want to play something for you. You're hearing Despondent at High Noon by At the Drive-In, featuring my guest, Tony Hajjar, on drums. Tony emigrated to the U.S. at a young age and began playing drums after his brother and legal guardian okayed it with everyone else in the family's apartment complex. Tony is At the Drive-In's fourth drummer, but his intense, emotionally raw style anchored what is now known as the classic lineup of the band. At the Drive-In achieved mainstream success with its 2000 album Relationship of Command, and the band broke up soon after its release. Aside from his work with At the Drive-In, Tony's drumming can be heard with bands such as Sparta and Gone is Gone. At the Drive-In reformed in 2012 and is currently on tour. I spoke to Tony in downtown Los Angeles. And now my conversation with Tony Hajjar.
I was born in Beirut, Lebanon.
Yeah.
And we were refugees during the war in the 70s. And we had a lot of family in El Paso. And so we moved to El Paso because my uncle was there and he helped us get all our paperwork and our green cards and stuff. And so that's, of all the places, we're like, El Paso it is, because we had family, and then that was it.
What did your parents do?
I didn't really know my dad that well, and so I recently found out. I always thought he was just a police officer, in
Lebanon.
In Lebanon.
So did he come over with you when you moved to El Paso?
That we were still all one piece. And I thought he was just like a police officer, the equivalent of an FBI agent here, because he was kind of like a big deal. Mm-hmm. And I remember, now I do the math, and I'm thinking, oh man, he was 41 when we moved here. He left everything, all his, all the respect, and he was folding shirts at my uncle's clothing store.
Wow.
And now as an adult, I look back and I'm like, wow. I don't understand. He took off, but I don't understand why he took off then. But now it's like, I kind of relate per se.
Yeah, and you're at a place where it doesn't pay to be angry about it. You have to try to be compassionate about it.
Yeah. So I recently ran into a cousin. I flew out my brother to do the last European tour because my brother ended up raising me, and I was like, he had some vacation time. I said, I'm gonna fly you down and spend 9 days with us in Europe. And we ran into a cousin from my mom's side, and he was the first person I've seen from my mom's side since we left Lebanon.
Oh, wow.
And so I got to see pictures of my mom's dad that I only faintly remember. And he was a bounty hunter for a living until he retired and opened a little general market.
Whoa.
So I've got all these, and then I found out from my cousin that my dad was beyond a cop. He was pretty much the equivalent of a special forces dude would be here. And so hey, we need you to go get this guy out of Syria or whatever it is, and they would send my dad and a few other guys. So learning all these now knowing about PTSD and everything he left, to fold shirts at my uncle's
That was his
store.
brother's clothing store? Or your mom's brother?
His own brothers,
okay,
yeah.
Gotcha.
And so I've been surrounded with a lot of really strong men that were involved in a lot of violence. And
Are you violent?
I used to be very violent.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I was the guy that everyone in the bar, the biggest guy with the biggest attitude, would find me to pick on.
Like you projected that attitude. You were ready to brawl.
No, I don't think I ever did. And my cousins would, if they were here, they would say, yeah, you're right. You never did. I really kind of was the head down, leave me alone kind of dude. Just I'm hanging out with my friends. But I was the guy that the toughest guy in the room wanted to like beat the hell out of. So I was always okay. And I was always that guy in a young age that was like, okay, I'm just going to grab this bottle and just smack you on top of the head because you're twice my size, and then I'll take advantage of the situation.
Yeah.
And so I was that guy, and I was also the guy that always jumped in front of my bandmates when they were picked on. The early years of At the Drive-In, that was me. But now, I try my best to stay away from anything violent, and I've got my kids of my own, and I don't want them to see that part of me. And I hope to say that I've matured.
Well, when did you move? So how old were you when you moved over?
I was 5.
You were 5. So do you have vague memories of Lebanon still?
Yeah, I very vague. I did a little short film in 2006 that went along with the last Sparta record, and the guys were really great to me and let me do a short film that Hollywood Records financed for me. And it was kind of like this, my idea was to release a movie that a la The Wall, like just no idea was formed. I just said that out loud in a band meeting. And my bandmates were like, how about you do, if you're comfortable with it, something about your life story? So it became, we did a short film that we filmed in El Paso called Imme Nakia. Imme Nakia translates to my mother Nakia, that was my mom. And so I got some of those recollections, and one of my main ones was a few nights before we left. We lived in a really tall, high-rise apartment building, and that's kind of how you lived in Beirut. It was very New York or downtown LA. And I remember being called up, and there was a missile stuck on the top of the building that never exploded.
Whoa.
And I made that into animation on my little short film, but that's my last memory of Lebanon.
So that's kind of like a life-defining
it would have been over.
Symbol.
I've for better or for worse, have had a lot of life-defining moments. My dad took off in '83.
So how old were you then?
I was 8.
Okay.
And my mom was dying of cancer. My brother drops out of college, his first year of college, works 2 jobs and raises us. And he's 11 years older than me. And so
he was only 19 years old when this was going down.
Yeah. And she ended up passing away in '88, and he took full guardianship of me. He refused to give it to the uncle I was just talking about earlier, who was originally supposed to be my guardian. And I love him to death to this day. But my brother just refused it. He's like, Tony's mine. I'm taking care of him. And so he pretty much gave up his whole life for me. Like he was in college. He was just like, he could have gone back to college. He had the opportunity. I had an uncle that was wealthy that said, hey, let Tony live here for a year or two until you get, on your feet. He moves to Seattle and my freshman year of high school. And I'm just like, I don't want to leave to Seattle. So I was, because I just, you don't want to leave your friends. And so he goes up there and he's like about to move me up in like 1990. And then he just decides the last minute that he's not. And he comes back. I leave my uncle's and I start living with him again. And pretty much we're like this team. He would work 2 jobs. I would get home from school, I figured out how to make dinner. I figured out how to wash his clothes. I was that guy, and that, I think that's why we have such a tight bond to this day.
Were you devastated at the time?
Oh yeah. I felt that my brother and I were alone. My sister was around. She was 2 years younger than my brother. And she just went out and lived her life, and not in a bad way. It's just like my brother kind of let her go. Like, you don't have to have responsibility of Tony. Mm-hmm. You finish college. and just visit, and he kind of let her go to live her life, which is, it just shows you my brother's character, So yeah, I was devastated. I was angry. That's where my violence really kicked off. That's where I was.
Did your father ever come back?
He would come back to renew his green card. And
so he was living where?
When he would come back, he would go like live at my uncle's for a little bit, or at really early on, because he left really early after he would come back to us, which sounds insane if you think about it.
Yeah.
Like he would leave us but come back to us. Mm-hmm. And my mom was just so sick at that point that there was no fight. So that was really weird. Like, oh, Dad's back? And you could just imagine the anger in my brother. And I was still a kid. I didn't really get it.
How did it shape your view of the world to lose both of your parents at such a young age?
To be honest with you, I never looked at it that way. It's always been about survival. So, like, to me, in my head, even at a young age, I remember being like super depressed at 15, 16. My mom passed when I was 15. And I remember one of my first thoughts was, someone has it worse. Someone has it worse. Someone has it worse. Mm-hmm. And it's so true.
It is true.
And that's what I teach my kids. Like, my kids have no problems. And,
right.
And
you don't want them to have problems.
No, don't want them to have problems. I just always say, I just don't want them to be assholes.
Right.
You know what I mean? I want them to be good kids that treat people really well and know what they have without taking advantage of what they have. Right. Those are my goals.
So how do you do that? I mean, how do you make them appreciate what they have when that's all they've known?
Lots of chores. Like, oh, you want that? Sure. I could get it for you. That's easy. But you have to work for it in some kind of way.
Yeah.
Even at my oldest guy is 9 and 7. And by no means am I a strict parent. I'm strict compared to some like newer standards, that's for sure. Mm-hmm. Which I call like Silver Lake parenting. Like everything's okay. Everyone gets a trophy. Everyone
curated life.
Yeah. And I don't believe in that. I believe in you work or you're just creating a whole bunch of like little pricks. Like
I think so.
Yeah, and that's the way I look at life in general. And so like it's going to be a struggle. Like it's a perfect comment. Like how do you do that? You're right. When you have a functioning marriage, functioning mom and dad that work really hard and for all intents and purposes do well. But you have to teach them that work is work and ethic is ethic. And if you don't have ethic, then it doesn't matter what you have. In my head, it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. If you don't have ethic, then it's like you're not a great human being in my eyes. And that's what I think all that stuff shaped me. I just I still feel that I have to work for it.
Widows, an antique replacement, a briefcase filled with mace. Widows, six-legged, lost and found. Students, spin a kid St. Mace, which you will fix and claim cat. Widows, six-legged, lost and found. Parker's wanted, summer apparel. Wet night, summertime.
During those times I was saying that my dad would bounce in and bounce out, I was starting to realize like, I love music and this is really cool. And I remember playing Motley Crue's Shout the Devil and going, I didn't know anything about any instruments or I had no idea what a drum set was, but I just remember like wanting to play something rhythmic. So I would pretend I would air drum to Tommy Lee, but I wanted to be Nikki Sixx. So it's just it was a very confusing time. And so it was one of those things that I remember that, and everyone would like kind of look at me like I was crazy. Our culture, and as many cultures, are like, oh, you're not going to be a doctor, you're not going to be a lawyer. Then what are you going to do with your life? I don't understand. Or you're not going to do sales.
By saying your culture, you're saying like the new immigrant culture where you're expected to excel in a traditional way.
Very traditional.
Yeah.
So even then, before I had knowledge of a traditional anything, family was lecturing me. Isn't that crazy? Like, I didn't have a drum set yet, and people were lecturing me. So I remember really finding that then. And then when I was 14, one of my cousins bought this Rogers drum set with the clip-on heads, pre-tuned heads. And, he was wealthy. He had the amazing house that I would dream of going over, because I knew that drum set was in that back room. And I would go sneak in and bang, 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 and all my cousins would yell at me and tell me, stop, stop, stop. So I was like, I'm never, even back then I remember going, I'm never going to have money to buy something like this. So I found a Memphis guitar in Juarez, Mexico. And I tried to learn how to play guitar. And then my brother, just to kind of have some kind of escape from his very harsh reality, bought my cousin's drum set for $50, the Rogers kit, brought it home. And it would just sit there because my brother would work all day long and all night long. And I would never touch it because I was like, I'm going to be a guitar player. And this guy comes over that's friends of a friend. And he's playing guitar. He knows like every Metallica song and every Megadeth song. And I'm like, he's like, you want to play along? I'm like, oh. And I just realized right then and there, I was like, I can't play guitar. So he literally looked at me. My mom was still alive, but kind of in her last days. And he said, why don't you play drums? And I'm like, okay. And I literally, that day, I just sat behind the drums and I said, okay, I'll play drums. And then it was very innate to me that this was my instrument. It was aggressive. I liked aggressive music. I was going through a hard time. I could beat the hell out of these drums, until they fall apart. And I got really into it for a few months, and then my mom passes away. Mm-hmm. And I used to I realized as an adult that I used to play drums and close the sliding door in this back room we had, this glass sliding door, to not hear my mom moan of pain. And then you realize later that you're like, you think of yourself as a horrible human being, but as a kid, you don't know what you're doing. And so when my mom passed, I literally stopped playing drums as a punishment almost to myself. So I lost all these years when, future bandmates and all these other friends were playing shows, I know that my bandmates, everyone at the drive-in, was playing shows at 12 and 13, and right. I missed that, and then I missed it again. And then I remember at 17 years old, I got back into drums. And
what made you get back into them?
It was just like I would listen to the radio late at night, and there would be all these specialty shows on the local station, like Metal Shop and stuff like that. Obviously, I keep mentioning heavy music. That was my initial inspiration. And I just listening to Slayer and all the heavy bands, then I was just like, I got to get back in. And at that point, my mom had passed. We were in this horrible neighborhood, this small apartment that was like 20 feet from a railroad track. And we just literally would shake the whole apartment when it passed by. And across that train track I knew that inside this house was a recording studio. And I'm like, one day I'm going to record in there. And every band that I've ever had recorded in that studio later.
What was your brother's attitude towards your musical aspirations?
The only person that was okay with it. I think he knew I needed some kind of escape, even though he was a child. I mean, what were we thinking at 25 and 26?
Well, but I'm sure his mentality was different than the average 25-year-old.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
He had to kind of grow up fast.
Yeah, very fast. And he was very supportive, and he just said, all the apartments said you could practice from 4:30 to 5:30.
So he talked to everybody.
He talked to everyone. It was like 6 apartments, and they were all so great to us, and they knew about a lot of the stuff that we had gone through, because one of the guys my brother went to high school with. And so they were just great to me. And if my brother wasn't home, they would be like, come and check in on me. And they're like, always supportive of my playing.
I imagine that must have been life affirming in some way to have, after something terrible happens, to actually have these basically strangers reaching out to try to help out a little bit in what way they could.
That was my life. It was always about my friends' parents and my friends this, my friends that. I have 2 friends to this day that I met on a table like this in kindergarten that I'm still friends with. And those 2 guys, I lived with them off and on and learned so much from their parents. And lucky for me, they were amazing parents that taught me hard work. Oh, you want to eat breakfast? Go mow the lawn. They treated me like their son. And that's what it was always, for me, it was always about friends and your friend's mom and your friend's dad, because I looked up to these stable environments, you know.
This episode of The Trap Set is brought to you in part by Colectivo Coffee, handmade coffee since 1993. Check them out online at colectivo.com.
How did you meet the guys from At the Drive-In?
The whole scene in El Paso, if you could call it that, was every band played together. I was in the prog metal band with Paul, with our bass player Paul.
Yeah.
Ironically enough.
It's a small enough community where people have to intermingle. There's not enough people where it's like there can be a punk scene.
Yeah,
and then a prog metal scene.
Exactly. The alternative band, let's say, like the band that you're like, oh, you sound exactly like the Cranberries, would play with us that we sounded
Yes.
like a prog metal band.
I feel like that was similar in Milwaukee. Where
Really?
I grew up,
Okay.
Where it's like, okay, the ska band is playing with the metal band is playing with some other shit. And I don't know. I think maybe that's I feel like growing up in a place where not everything is readily available is actually, I think that helped me as a kid. Like it made me dig deeper for what it is I was looking for.
Absolutely.
And also to appreciate people that come from different musical backgrounds.
Yeah, exactly. Because I always tell my kids, because now they're into music, and I just say, it doesn't matter who you go watch or see, and whatever their level of playing is, you better pick up one thing from them.
Yeah.
And because everyone has something to offer. And that's how I always looked at it in the scene too. Like, yeah, I wasn't into the alternative band per se, but I was like, oh, I like that trick that drummer did, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I always took from all these, even though I was like, you know, in the prog metal band, you know, I was like, I took a lot from it, you know.
I feel like also with your kids' generation, there's less delineation between genres. That's something I talk about a lot. Like when I was growing up, when you were growing up, I think the type of music was more indicative about what type of person you wanted to identify
Very
as.
true, yeah.
And I think partially that was because at that time you had to actually make a purchase when you wanted to buy an album. It was more of a commitment.
Yeah.
And so if you're buying a Slayer album with that hard-earned lawn mowing money, you know, it's like, okay, this is my tribe.
This is
I'm
what I
making
do.
this choice. I'm going to buy this Slayer album. You don't have the option of then also listening to whatever else on shuffle. So it's like you commit to it.
That's a great way of putting it. I really like that. And it's so true. You're right. Every other Friday, when I was really young, my mom would take me to Kmart and we'd buy a tape. And I get to pick one tape.
Do you remember the first tape that you bought that really meant something to you?
Yes. Twisted Sister, which was Stay Hungry, the big one.
Yeah.
We're
not going to take it.
Yeah, we're not going to take it. But that was like, you know, it was silly. And I even realized back then it was silly. And kind of like the first tape that I bought that was like, this isn't silly, but I like it, was Dio Last in Line. Mm-hmm. And because I was just like, this is serious, you know. Yeah. It's like, you know, and I like that. I like serious music, you know. I don't like to laugh and play music, you know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? I like music that is serious.
Yeah,
that's me. But yeah. So getting back to the question, that's how I kind of met all those guys, And you fast forward, they toured with Bernie, and then they got another drummer named Davey. Then they got your friend Ryan Sawyer, and they recorded that first full-length Acrobatic Tenement. And that's when I really met them. I had just joined a band that I always liked as a kid, and they were a punk band. And nothing against the drummer, rest in peace, Eric Salas, he passed away recently. But I idolized the drummer they had, and they didn't reform not because he wasn't in the band anymore. It just ironically reformed around me in a weird way. And I formed that band. I later realized they weren't really into touring like they were when I first heard of them. So the guitar player really pushed me. He's like, you got to listen to At the Drive-In, you got to listen to At the Drive-In. And I remember listening to Acrobatic Tenement and thinking, I can't play like this. Mm-hmm. It's jazzy, it's loose. I'm literally the opposite. And I liked the record immediately, but I was just like, I don't think I'm the right guy. When they were looking for a drummer, I was like, I'm not the right guy. But that's when I met up with Cedric at this local venue, and he made me a mixtape. And on that mixtape was Fugazi, Indian Summer, Hoover, Hoover was like, oh, these guys are heavy. And
shout out to Chris Farrell.
and Hoover was one of those things that, for me, I was like, oh, I could be in a band like this because they were heavier. So Cedric gave me that mixtape, and he goes, we'd rather be in this vein than the looser Acrobatic Tenement vibe, even though we were going to tour on that record.
Right.
So I just played those songs the way I wanted to play them.
Right.
And so there was a lot of convincing at first to get me into the band, and Jim and I completely clashed. We're both A personalities, we're both leaders. I wanted to lead the band, he was leading the band. And I remember we had planned the whole tour in 1996, and we sat down at a Village Inn. And I looked at all of them and I said, hey guys, I'm out. I can't do this. Jim and I just don't click. You started the band. All due respect, this is your band. You guys need to do it. You need to get a drummer. I'm out. And I literally left that table thinking I'm going to go see my then girlfriend, now wife, in Dallas and just audition for bands, and maybe I'll join a Dallas band. Or I was just really confused, and I came back to 3 days later to an answering machine full of messages from Omar. I'm like, these guys should be rehearsing. Like why are they calling me? I just left the band, and then he was like, hey, right after you left, you disappeared on us. We tried to reach you, and you never. Back then, it's like there's no cell phones, and he goes, Jim left the band right after you left the band. Oh man, to be a child again. But so I was like, they're like, so are you in? And I'm like, yeah. So Omar was playing bass at that point. And the guy that got me into At the Drive-In and introduced me to him was the guy in that other punk band I just talked about called Two Edge. And he kind of snaked his way into the band with me alongside of him because he really wanted to be there, and I was kind of like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And I was like, oh, wow. So I was like, I told Omar, I was like, are you going to play guitar? And he goes, because the first time I jammed with Omar, we were playing stuff off Acrobatic Tenement, and he's playing bass. He used to be the bass player. And I'm like, dude, you play like a guitar player. You should play guitar.
Yeah.
So a lot of people don't know that first incarnation of At the Drive-In that I was in was Omar just switching to guitar. We got Paul in, because Paul and Omar grew up together, and everyone knew that Paul and I were like this tight rhythm section, had done 3 bands together. And that guy, Ben, that no one really knows about, I don't think we've ever really mentioned him in an interview, to be honest with you. And we decided to go on tour for 4 months. We booked 4 months. So it was Cedric, Omar on guitar, Ben on guitar, Paul and I. And within 3 weeks of that tour, we kicked Ben out. For a lot of issues that I won't discuss. But we finished 3.5 months of that tour as a 4-piece, with Omar playing the only guitar. He said we need to get a guitar player when we get home. And I remember being asked, who do you think it should be? out of our small scene, and I said, it has to be Jim. And they were like, what? Like, and I'm like, he started this band. I've grown up a little bit being on tour with you guys. I'm sure he's grown up a little bit being home and not in the band he helped start. So that's how the lineup that everyone knows kind of started.
When do you feel like the chemistry came into focus? Or when did it feel like this was something special?
Never. and I'm not saying that it's not, because we never looked at it that way.
But how did it feel in your body when you were playing with those guys?
To this day, it feels like an explosion, constant. Like I always say it's the most positive anxiety that I could ever describe. And I've never had it with anyone else.
Did it feel that way, like right when you got Jim back in the band? Or
there was growing pains.
Yeah.
Him and I were still kind of figuring it out, and then then we both chilled out, and then I started taking over really the business, which I felt at that point I excelled at, and so like he kind of took a back seat when it came to that.
So you kind of figured out ways to define roles, to channel your neurotic behavior and his neurotic behavior into different productive means.
Exactly, and to this day, like the way that this band works is that we know everyone's strengths. So we let everyone do their strengths. If there's going to be electronic stuff and looping and computer work, it's like I get called. If there's production, Omar gets called. If there's art, Cedric gets called. If there's tour production and really making sure the numbers are right, we have Paul. If there's graphic design and pushing the art of At the Drive-In to another level, there's Keely. So everyone just takes the role, and everyone trusts each other now. It used to be like in all things, like everyone's checking up on everyone, and now it's like, hey, that's your role, go do it, and that's it. We know you do that well, so you do it, you know, and that's how we've become a very healthy project again, because there's just a ton of respect in the room.
The Trap Set will always be available for free, but we rely on donations from our listeners. Please visit our website at thetrapset.net and click donate. Subscribe to our show on iTunes, and if you enjoy what you hear, give us a review.
What was your brother doing at this point after he didn't have to be your guardian?
He was always really supportive. He had met a woman that they fell in love, and she had a baby. And which is, my niece now, and she's 30. She was 6 months old when I met her, and then they eventually had another daughter, my other niece, and he was just working delivering water, and just working hard. And he met his wife. She was a receptionist at the water company, like one of those 5-gallon places. He was the guy that brought up the water to you, and that's what he was doing, and slowly just kind of got his foot in the door, and then eventually became a firefighter. And he really never stopped helping people, and if you really think about it, so that's what he was doing then. And he was living out the outskirts of El Paso, this place called La Union. It's in New Mexico, but it's close enough to El Paso. But yeah, he was always super supportive, while everyone else in my family, at that point, my dad had come back and was living here.
And did you reconcile with him?
Kind of, sort of. There were some horrible moments of craziness that, I like to forget.
Working out your shit.
And, but ironically enough, right before I went on that first tour without the drive-in, he was living in an apartment near Omar's house. And I lived with him.
With Omar or your dad?
No, I lived with my dad, which was crazy at that point in my life, but I really had nowhere to go. And I kind of outlasted I didn't feel comfortable going back to friends' houses and all that stuff. So, and I was saving up to go on tour. So, you know.
Isn't that funny? We had to save up to go on tour.
Yeah, exactly.
I can remember getting paid something like $40 for a show, and that was enough because back then, especially in the South, gas was under $1 a gallon.
Yeah, don't you
Our
remember gas
van
being like
costs-
90 cents?
Yes,
or something?
or even
Yeah.
some places under 90 cents. Like I remember in like some places in Texas or like Missouri.
Yeah.
And also you could get 49-cent tacos from Taco Bell.
Exactly.
Or like bean burritos
Yeah.
without cheese because I was vegan at the time. That just seems crazy.
Yeah. No, yeah, we did the same thing. In the cheap gas, we had a little, I had a little planner with the little zipper inside with the clear thing. And that's where we put all our cash.
The money, yes.
And I was the keeper of that. And we, you know, no one would buy our merch or our CDs. But the smartest thing we ever did, and it was just, I think it was like Cedric's idea. We went to Juarez, crossed the border before we went on tour, and we bought probably about 200 Mexican wrestling masks. Mm-hmm. And the only thing we would sell on the road were those masks. And people would put them on and then watch us play, the three people, or they would put them on for the headliner, or the, you know, and we lived off those Mexican wrestling masks for years. I've always thought like we should get those masks again and start selling them, you know. But yeah, we lived on those masks and the $20-$30 if we were lucky. And most of the time, as you know too, like you wouldn't get paid.
Yeah. It was very punk rock. I mean, like getting paid money almost felt like counter to what you're doing.
I remember the first tour that we made money, which was late '97. And I think this first tour with Jim back or something like that. And we made $1,100, and I split it 5 ways. They dropped me off in Dallas where my girlfriend was living, and they drove to El Paso from there. And I was like, all right, guys, come in. They came in. They all showered. And then when they were doing that, I split it up, and I said,
$220.
everybody. And we were just like, we were so proud of ourselves. I remember like we just hugged each other so tight. Like we made $1,100 on this tour, net. Like we were so proud of ourselves. And I remember like, you know, again, you do stupid things, but I just told Nicole, and my now wife, I just said, could we just go buy a record player with this money? So we drove down to Denton where she was going to school, and you know, that was a cool area then. You know, you had UNT, the music school, and all that stuff.
Rubber gloves, Mr. Chopsticks.
You got it.
Cool beans.
Cool beans. Saw Baboon there. Mm-hmm. And we just bought a record player, and we just bought 2 records. That's all we could afford. And
When In Casino Out came out, it felt like there was a lot of buzz around the band. How did that manifest in your life?
we actually felt zero buzz. We thought,
Really?
you know, our shows were growing definitely, but to really put everything in perspective, it took us 1 full year of constant touring. I remember that year we played the Fireside in a year 6 times. The Fireside Bowl in
Chicago, yes.
6 times in a year. That's how much we were touring. And I remember finding out at one of those shows at the Fireside that the label called me and said, you've officially sold 10,000 records in a year of In Casino. It took us that long. So I remember that being like a mile marker. Like, we just are right. So then we needed a long break because we were getting to the point that 50 to 75 to 100 people were showing up to the shows, depending where. And we were ready to write. And so we went home, got jobs again, set up camp in Omar's parents' garage. And we had leftovers from In Casino Out, them being Proxima Centauri and Heliotrope, a song called Heliotrope. And we wanted to write some more. So we had never done this before. We decided to just get high every day. And I was Mr. Mechanical, like, I don't do drugs. I am Mr. Business. You know, I was like and we all decided just to let go of anything that, like, if one of the guys didn't drink, they would have a little drink that day. I would do a little weed that day. Like,
What was the theory behind it?
they was just, let's just let loose.
Yeah.
Like, I remember we were at a parking lot, and I forgot how the conversation started, but it started as an argument. The band started arguing, in which we didn't do much. And really, in the end, we got to the point that people didn't want to be that band that In Casino Out represented forever. Mm-hmm. So we went out and we would just ride all day, and that's where songs that were, for us at that point, more experimental, like Metronome Centauri Metronome Arthritis, 300 megahertz, Rasquache. That's why I bought my first little drum machine with our second amount of money that we ever made, the Elisa's SR16, which is gone. I wish I still had that thing. And like I used to play loops and create loops and so that was our mentality. And then we went out and recorded those songs, and we knew there was 2 songs left over from In Casino, and that's how Via came out. And Via is to this day something that we're all like extremely proud of. Yeah.
When did you get approached by a major label?
So we go from everyone booing us to throwing things at us to like thinking we're horrible every night to people starting to get into us. And I remember my manager was like, you're going to open for the Get Up Kids. So we got a Get Up Kids tour, and they were playing with like 1,000 people at that point. And I just remember going, we're in 99 at this point. Via was out. And
this was when they had a major label deal too, I think, or Vagrant or something.
Vagrant was just getting big.
Yeah.
Like Vagrant was becoming a huge indie.
Yeah.
Because of that record. And so we took that tour, which we come from the same world, you and I. So to lump At the Drive-In, Jimmy Eat World, Promise Ring, Get Up Kids into emo or whatever, it's like, it was just like, we don't sound at all like any of these guys, and they don't sound like us, and we're like, but we were just confused by that whole thing. And so people started, like, all of a sudden the labels that like were literally laughed when we called them, like Hopeless and other and Vagrant and all those, all of a sudden started calling us, Jade Tree, all of them, like they would literally went from ignoring everything to calling us. And all of a sudden we're like, wait, Reprise wants to meet with us? Warner wants to meet? So this is 99. This is mid 99. So I was excited. I grew up on majors. That was my goal. Like, you could call me a sellout in the punk community. I didn't care. I was like, that's
Were the other guys more ambivalent about it?
A little bit, but they also saw the promise.
Yeah.
But this, like, that was mine and Paul's dream right there. I was like, that's it, you know? And so we met with the Reprise and Warner and every major, like, I was, at one point I was just in shock. But what attracted us to go into the next step was this label that we had heard that John Silva, who managed Nirvana and managed all these big bands, and to this day he still manages a lot of amazing bands, was partnering up with Gary Gersh, who signed Nirvana and was a big A&R, with massive investors, and there's an internet record label they're starting. It's called Den and Blockbuster and Pepsi, and everyone's funding it. So millions and millions and millions of dollars. And we're like, that sounds interesting because that sounds weird.
Yeah.
So we met with them, and immediately we're like they're gonna match the money that the regular major labels are gonna give us, and this is strange and it's weird, and they're pushing the internet, and they were, like, really looking back, they were well ahead. Mm-hmm. Like, they had T1 lines, mm-hmm. but they were creating content that people couldn't have at home.
Right.
So they're kind of ahead of. So they gave us the money, and that's the money we used to record Relationship of Command. And in the middle of that recording, they're all, "Hey Tony, it's for you." And I was like, I go to the phone, and it's the A&R guy, Craig Aronson, also rest in peace. He passed away a few years ago. And he goes, "I got some good news and some bad news." And I'm like, "What's up?" And I'm like, "Oh my God." And he's like, "Well, something really bad happened with Den." And I'm like, "What happened?" And one on a tech side, Like this made national news, so I don't mind saying it. One of the tech side bigger guns was like dating younger boys.
Okay.
Yeah, and so everyone
Pulled out.
pulls out. But the smartness of the people we were working with, and maybe the dumbness on our side, but so Gary Gersh and John Silva, they're working with Mike D at that point, with one of the biggest bands in the world at that point, and they're like, let's just shift at the drive-in over to Grand Royal. And so to us, that sounds like a dream. Like, we're on Mike D's label. Like, this is the best thing on earth. But with that, they got an insane amount of money from Virgin because they had at the drive-in. We didn't see much of that money, unfortunately. We saw $500 a month, but each member. But we got to finish our record.
Yes, this is the campaign slithered in trails in the cargo bay. A new turd is the vastness, hollow vacuum, chop the oxygen tanks. They hibernate, but how they kiss the ground, pucker up and kiss the asphalt now. Tease this amputations, splintered larynx, it has access now. Get away, fair transmission to the water system. Get away, fair transmission from the water system.
I remember seeing you guys on the cover of like Rolling Stone or some big magazine at a newsstand, and I was like, oh great, those guys made it, they deserve it. And then like a couple months later you broke up. So what happened?
You know, it's the same notion of like, when you have anything that you do, you get no attention for it for many, many years, and you get used to the struggle, and you get used to people hating you, and you get used to people not respecting what you do. And then all of a sudden, for us, at least as a band, we went from that to literally, you know, usually you break in one country, and then you're like, okay, now we're gonna try to break in Europe, and now we're gonna try to break in Asia. We broke around the world at the same time. When we were doing touring for that record, it started in the US, and then we went to Europe. We were doing 7 hours of press a day, and then playing our crazy show, and then, you know, being kids and partying all night, and then doing the same thing every day until we literally burnt out. I just didn't want to lose what we had worked so hard for. And so a lot of us, there's amazing video of us arguing backstage in Berlin if we're going to play Greece and Israel. And we're like, they just rocked Rage Against the Machine in Greece, literally threw stones at them. If they're going to stone Rage Against the Machine, they're going to kill at the drive-in. We're literally arguing about playing shows which we never argued about. It was these new issues, new problems of more grown-up band stuff that we never had to deal with. And I remember playing a show at the Vera at a venue in Groningen in the Netherlands. And I remember there was literally no emotion on stage. And I remember it was a super high stage. I would say the stage was like 6 feet, 7 feet high. And I remember we finished the show. I jumped off the stage in the back. I didn't even go to the backstage with the band. I grabbed my throne and I put it under the stage, and I sat under the stage with a towel over my head, and I started weeping like a child. And uncontrollably, I had no idea why. I didn't know what was going on internally.
So when you look at it in retrospect, what were you weeping about?
That we were losing our friendship. And I remember Jim came and got me, and he's like, it's okay. And he hugged me and he goes, we're going to go home. And we had another month of sold out shows. We were exploding. Everything we wanted to happen, you know, and
it's like what they always say, be careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
But nobody ever believes it until it actually happens, right?
Yeah. And we went backstage and we said, hey, let's go home. and we enacted what we used to call the 6-month rule. Anyone could pull that tab, like 6-month rule, meaning you stop the band for 6 months and then
Safe
you
word.
regroup. Safe word. Jim, Paul, and I go home. Omar and Cedric stay in Europe and tour with De Facto, their dub project. And so we get kind of convinced to doing these shows 2 Roseland nights, 2 Riviera nights in Chicago. Like, for us, like, think about that.
Yeah.
At the drive-in, 2 nights at the Roseland, in New York. We'd never, to be...
And like 3 years earlier, you're making $100
Yeah.
after a tour.
Yeah, and so we get convinced that, like, because we get rested and we have, like, we go home, so we get convinced that we should do the shows. We say yes, those guys still say no, and they were really hurt that we enacted the 6-month rule and we said yes, and we, instead of communicating about it, we just broke up. Mm-hmm. And the crazy part of that story, like, all those 4 sold out shows was the White Stripes were going to open up for us. It's so funny to me when I really look back to that. I'm just like,
I remember
such a
seeing them to
massive
15
band.
people in Milwaukee too.
Yeah, and when I tell that story to friends that aren't in music, they laugh. I'm like, yeah, exactly. That's where we were at that point. you know? And that's how that band ended.
And then immediately it almost felt like you guys fractured into Mars Volta and Sparta.
Yeah.
Did that feel like a compulsory thing? Like you were like, okay, well, I want to capitalize on this momentum and keep moving forward?
Yeah, it wasn't. I wish it was momentum. It was just survival. Like, that's all we knew.
Yeah.
They knew that they were going to start another band. The rest of us didn't. Like, Paul and I talked months later, and we said, "You want to just jam?" And he said, "I want to play guitar." And I'm like, "Play guitar. I don't care."
Yeah.
Because he played bass at the drive-in. So, like, and then when we started looking for singers, like, literally we had no idea. And then we called Jim and said, "Hey, I know this is crazy, but do you want to sing?" And he goes, and it was hard for him because he was like, and get compared to Cedric every single night? Like, I'm not Cedric. I'm not that amazing front man. I play guitar and I sing. Like, that's all I'm going to do. And we just said, let's just write some songs. And we wrote literally I would say 3/4 of the first record, called Wire Type Scars, within the first 6 days that we jammed. Just us 3. And that's how it was. Like, I don't know. In retrospect, like, I don't know. Like, I go back and forth if that was the right thing to do or not the right thing to do. But at that point, it was just survival.
When you think of Sparta and your time doing that band,
Yeah.
what makes you the most proud?
The most proud is that we released our first record as pretty much titled as the backup band of At the Drive-In. And it does well because they're like, oh, these guys can write. And again, the idea in At the Drive-In was never like, there was not a leader. Everyone composed, everyone did something. But, like, again, what the press had made us, they literally made us as the backup band of, the rest of the guys. And so it was really nice to release a record and get it critically acclaimed. Mm-hmm. Because it was...
Did you find yourself comparing your band's, like, external success and acclaim to that of Mars Volta at the time?
I tried not to. God, no one's ever asked me that. I tried not to, and I tried to pretend that I didn't think about them all the time. And while Jim and Paul would always talk about them, and Paul was obsessed with making us friends, even then. Even then, in 2001, right after we broke up, he was like, let's just be friends. We could be in 2 bands. And to this day, he's that guy.
Yeah.
He keeps us communicating. He keeps us going. And he's our rock when it comes to that. And I would get furious with Paul. I'm just like, I don't want to fucking talk to them. They're saying horrible things about us.
Were they saying horrible things about you?
Yeah, for a long time. And I could say this because Cedric has, admitted it. And we've gone away. We've grown out of it. he was just being very negative about it, and especially about.
Well, he was probably hurt.
Well, you find out years later, and you sit down and you shed a few tears and you hug and I thought they never thought about us, and I thought they were like, because obviously they became a much bigger band than Sparta, so I thought like they don't think about us, they don't care about us, but later finding out that they hurt for us like we hurt for them, and even with the crazy success that they had, they missed us as much as we missed them. And it sounds kind of weird, but it's just like we were like, oh my God, that's the way they hurt, and we hurt by just not saying anything. We always wanted to take the high road, but we were hurting bad, and so were they.
And then you kind of resent yourself for hurting because you're like, why can't I just get over this?
Exactly.
These are my exes.
Yeah.
Like it's time to move forward.
But I think we just really felt that and we still talk about this pretty regularly because it's part of the DNA, and we never want that to happen. We just felt that they felt that we left them out of like the decision making and said, yeah, let's do those shows. When they come back, they'll be fine. We'll play these shows. And we felt like they just like all the success and all the attention they were getting got to their heads. And none of that was true.
Or maybe it was all true to a certain extent.
To a certain extent, maybe. But, and we still talk about this. Like Omar and I now are so close. We laugh about that we had such a difficult relationship. Like we hang out every day off. We'll be
that's rare.
In each other's hotel room, laughing and like planning our meals and where we're going to eat and what we're going to do, and then serious talks, and then like go have dinner, and it's just awesome. We all hang out. I would say we hang out 70% of our days off, which is amazing for a band. And when we're backstage, Cedric has his own dressing room because he gets embarrassed that he has to warm up,
right,
and not be loud. And he doesn't want to bother us, which is, again, that's the amount of respect everyone has for each other. But we literally like we'll find the smallest dressing room and we'll take it so we could all be together. And we spend a lot of time together because we never want to get to the point. As we all know in all relationships, the more time you spend apart, the more stuff you can make up in your head.
Yes.
So even on breaks, yesterday, we're on a long break right now. We were on Cedric was at my house the day before yesterday, and I was on the phone with Omar and Paul yesterday, and I was talking to Keely this morning. So it's amazing the communication that we have now, and any band and any person that you interview that has had success in these kinds of relationships will always say, it's like if you stop talking, then that's when it just goes downhill.
Yeah, and that's any relationship.
Yeah, exactly. More complicated when it's a whole bunch of men.
Yeah. Well, that's because we're conditioned not to talk about our feelings.
Exactly. It's easy just not to say anything.
You can't do that as a musician, though, especially.
You can't do that as an adult. Let's just put it that way.
This episode of The Trap Set is brought to you in part by Merge Records, the label that over the last 25 years has been home to many great bands, including The Magnetic Fields, Spoon, and Neutral Milk Hotel. Check out recent releases by Y-Oak, Superchunk, Tracy Thorn, Titus Andronicus, and Ott. Listeners of this podcast get 20% off any order by visiting mergerecords.com and using coupon code TRAPSET. As always, domestic shipping is free. Again, go to mergerecords.com and enter TRAPSET at checkout to get 20% off your purchase. Merge Records, home of independent music since 1989. You described your childhood and your early adulthood as survival. You were in survival mode. And then also, it seems like whenever you've been able to have really worked hard to create a stable environment for yourself as an adult, which is totally understandable given the tumultuous nature of your childhood.
Yeah.
It sounds like you've been with your wife for over 20 years.
22 years this month.
You have 3 children. You've been living in the same house for a long time. It seems like any kind of parameters that are within your control, you're making sure to create that stability.
Yeah.
When do you feel like mentally you've been able to shift away from that survival mode?
Never. I live in that survival mode every single day.
Is it as acute as it was when you were a kid?
Absolutely. And it's something that I dying to change of myself, and I just can't. I wake up, and I had a conversation with Paul recently, and I said, do you wake up every morning, and because he also grew up very poor, like me, and I go, do you wake up every morning and like feel that you have to work so you don't lose everything in the next hour? He goes, every morning. And I still wake up that way.
Have you ever taken a vacation?
It's very rare, but
Do you feel anxious when you're on a vacation?
oh my God, so anxious.
Yes.
Yes. So anxious that, but again, being a parent, you're taking away from the amazing experience that your kids are feeling. So I have to like push myself to like enjoy this. You want to remember that smile on their face when you're in the woods or you're climbing a mountain in Sedona or whatever, we're doing that break.
Right.
And that's what I have to constantly remind myself about.
Have you ever tried therapy or anything like that to get out of that mindset?
Oh yeah. I'm cured. No, no, I did. I'm not doing it right now, but I did therapy for like 2.5, 3 years, trying to deal with a lot of my at the drive-in issues and a lot of my adolescent issues and stuff like that. And so yeah, I think it helps. And now I do a lot of, I guess there is a spiritual part of me. I've been studying TM for many years now, and that really helps me.
Have you ever met David Lynch?
I know I would love to, and
It'll happen once you get to the next level.
But that's what I like about TM. It's not a lot of bullshit, and it's not a religion. It's just about being within yourself, which I have a really hard time doing, and it's really helped me do that.
Well, you alluded to your business with your wife.
Yes.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
I told her one day, I go, what do you want to do? It's like, you supported me with this crazy life for all these years. What do you want to do? And she said, I want to start my own company. I want to do speech therapy. I want to do occupational therapy. I want to do autism services. And I go, okay, how do we do that? And because she had started all these speech programs for all these other companies and made them successful. And she goes, well, I have to write out I'm going to bore some musicians right now, but I have to write a service description. We're going to turn it into the state. If the state accepts you, then they could start referring clients to you. And in California, if any child if there's a certain amount of need, they get services from 0 to 3 through our regional centers. Most amazing thing in California. That's why we pay high taxes. We help a lot of people. So I remember the day we got the letter from the regional center, and it said, you have been awarded vendorship. And then we just waited by the phone to get that first client. And we lived off 3 clients. The first 3 clients we got within the first week. Nicole would go see them at their homes, and I would just literally do billing and take care of our oldest son. Literally bounce him on my arm while I'm doing billing and trying to be this business guy at home and get the right licenses and the right insurances. Then you fast forward, so I don't bore everyone. We recently got a big facility that we opened up in October of 2016. We had an office on Sunset in Alexandria for a long time. Now we have a big building that we house. We see about 400 clients. We have 46 employees.
46 employees.
Wow. And we just added a private preschool in the same facility that our youngest son gets to go to, which is really exciting.
How would you compare the satisfaction that you get from running a business to playing drums in a band?
So I always say it's the 2 sides of my brain. So I mean, I I was a chemist and a mathematician, and so I get to use that side of my brain for that. And as we all know, drums are math, and so I get to use a little bit of that. And to me, now going on tour is like going on vacation. It's not work to me because I've not had it too, and I've starved for it too. I stopped playing pretty much from 2008 to late 2009 because I was just working. I was doing the 9 to 5 at our own company.
Were you thinking, okay, maybe this is just my life now? I've had a good run.
No.
Or did you think it would come back?
I was depressed.
Okay.
I was hungry for music and doing something artistic, and I realized, and she realized too, like I'm a different person when I'm not around music in some kind of way, and so it was a very difficult time for me. But I also knew, because I'm always in survival mode, like if I don't do this, then we don't survive. Like sometimes music just doesn't pay the bills.
Yeah.
We all know that. And so, but I always knew that I was going to do it. So I was like, I'm going to be a composer. And I figured out really quickly that no one was going to hire a drummer that says he's a composer. And so I met this guy that started his own movie trailer advertising company. He was doing music for movie trailers, and he needed drums on a whole bunch of tracks in 2009. And I was like, me, So I went and I tracked drums on all his trailers, and he taught me how a trailer works. I composed one trailer, and I made it on his first CD. And then later we became really close, and we started doing these CDs together, and I would co-invest. And I started scoring a whole bunch of movie trailers in 2009 and 10, and we had a lot of success all into 2012 when At the Drive-In got back together. And then in 2013, Mike from Sunset Music, we scored Splinter Cell, really big video game that was intense. That was 14-hour days for like 6 months. And you also know this world. And so I got really lucky too there, and then from doing all this music and having this one trailer like appear in like almost 30 different films, we said that could be a song. And I remember calling Troy Van Leeuwen,
Yes.
from Queens of the Stone Age and Perfect Circle and every cool band that you could possibly imagine. And I said, hey, come play guitar on this trailer that we want to make a song. And that's how we kind of got the idea to start Gone Is Gone. And so it's all been this kind of like big snowball rolling down a hill of everything I've been wanting to try and do. And obviously it hasn't all been successful, but I got a lot of really cool stuff happen as well,
So I've been looking at your tattoo on your right arm. Is that your mom?
It is.
Do you like talk to your mom's spirit? Like, do you communicate with her, or do you think about her a lot?
I think about her a lot. The only time I talk to her is before we go on stage every night. We give each other a big hug, and we group in a circle, and we remind each other how lucky we are to be still doing this. And believe it or not, almost every single night it's pseudo emotional. I mean, I'm not saying tears or anything like that, but it's like we're here again. We get to do this again.
Well, it doesn't sound like pseudo emotional. It sounds like emotional.
Yeah, we
I guess you guys are an
we've
emo band
forgiven
after
each
all.
other. We've forgiven each other for all our mistakes, and because we all committed them, and we moved on from them, and we remind ourselves constantly that we did move on from them. And then I get out of that group hug, I get on my knees, and I think of all three of my children's smiles, how they smile. They smile very differently. And then I kiss my tattoo of my mom and thank her for guiding me to this stage that night. And then I go on stage.
I have some questions from listeners.
Yes.
Jose's question is, you play with such passion and emotion. How do you keep that intensity up, especially after all these years and taking a break?
I guess because I never really took a break. I always tried to play, and I cannot play with that intensity, I think. And so I always think I'm having a bad show if I'm not playing intense. So some people have to take like caffeine to get on stage. I have to take stuff that brings me down to get on stage.
So what does that mean?
Because one beer. Before it used to be a lot more, but just one beer or like a meditation or something. I have to bring myself down because I'm always running at a very hot level. So I think it's just kind of innate in me. But yeah, one day it's going to change. I'm older, but right now I just go with it.
Johnny is asking what the process was for recording drums for Invalid Litter Department.
Yeah, the process. It was, that song especially was all about emotion. There was nothing fancy about that song. It was about the spoken word Cedric was saying about the women and all the suffering that was happening in Juarez and all the women getting killed after working at the maquilas, the factories. So to me, I literally would just think about these women when I tracked that song, because we all knew what that song was about prior to tracking it. And the process was literally just being one with the emotion instead of back then just being intense the whole time.
Justin asks if it's true that the band Prozac Memory had an influence on At the Drive-In. I read that, and to be honest, I don't remember, but it could be one of the guys. Yeah.
But I personally don't remember that.
Someone named Cedric wants to know if you want a Chuba Chew. That looks like a cannabis edible. Yeah,
can you tell Cedric that I do not want a Chiba Chew? Because nothing against Chiba Chew, but I tried it, and when you're a person that's a lightweight like me, and you try a little bit of a Chiba Chew, and you think you're going insane.
You got to tell the story now.
It's almost embarrassing. I recently decided that I'm gonna
try edibles.
Well, just try weed in general. Again, I've never been that guy, and I decided to get the prescription and the whole 9 yards and chill myself out because I'm never chill. Anyway, so I go to this one place. The guy's like, "Oh, you get to pick one free thing." And I was like, "You pick it." I just finished telling this guy for 15 minutes I want everything mellow. I'm like a lightweight. Yeah. So he's like, "This is a really simple edible. Eat this much. You're going to be," and then everything's cool. So I go home knowing that I have an hour before anyone gets home. And then I was like, "Oh, when my wife comes, I'll let her know that I'm on it, and then she'll take care of me, and then we'll have dinner, and I'll be cool. It's nothing major." I take the amount of Chiba Chew, and I literally think that I'm going to freak out. And anything I look at, I start going into where it was made, how it was created. If I looked at a light bulb, I'd be like, okay, so where'd they get the glass, and how did they form the glass? And then there's a leaf outside. So that leaf, when it grows on a tree, and I literally was, and then my wife gets home and I tell her, and she cannot stop laughing because she'd rather be me be in this mode than any other mode. So I try to, even though I think it's a intense, great product, it scared me a little bit.
And then we'll just end with this, which isn't even a question, but it's from a guy named Aaron Steele, who's a great drummer. He's been on this show. He says that your playing was the first that he emotionally connected with, and you changed his life. So there you go.
Thank you.
I think that's a great place to end it. Tony Hajjar, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
The Trap Set is produced by me, Joe Wong, along with Chris Karwowski, who also edits the program. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at The Trap Set, and visit our website, thetrapset.net, to subscribe to our show for free. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please donate to our show. If you can't afford to donate, please tell a friend and give us a good rating on iTunes. Send your feedback and guest requests to thetrapset@gmail.com.